All right, let's get started then. This is the third out of 4 in the current mini-series. We're talking about the ethical challenge overall, and this one is human rights and corporate social responsibility. I'm grateful to Steve and Reem and Zeifens LLP for making this possible. If you have a cell phone and you're able to silence it or make it vibrate instead of ring, that would be wonderful. So, corporate social responsibility is a catchphrase these days. It's even known just as CSR, and everyone is supposed to know what that is. It is corporate social responsibility, and we're going to define that in a few minutes, beyond just saying overall the catchphrase corporate social responsibility. But this is something which essentially refers to good behavior by businesses. That's essentially what we're talking about. And it's not about legislation. It's not about not doing things that are illegal. Yes, you're not supposed to do things that are illegal. But the idea is engaging in conduct which is good for your employees, which is good for the community. And again, we're going to be more specific about what's included. But the Canadian government has taken a stand that corporate social responsibility is good for business and is good for Canada. If you take a look at your first source, this is from Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. I don't actually know what they do except spend your tax dollars, but it's a good name. Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada. It's an article called Corporate Social Responsibility. A growing number of businesses have recognized an increasing consumer demand for products and services from organizations that take responsibility for their impact on the environment, the communities where they operate, their employees, their stakeholders, and the general public. And that's actually a pretty good summary of what CSR is about. The environment, the communities, the employees, stakeholders, and public. You've pretty much included everybody. As a good corporate citizen, your business decisions will be aligned with an ongoing effort to make every impact of your business positive. Your active attention to it will affect your business's conscience as well as your bottom line. So in other words, corporate social responsibility is good for business. Why is it good for business? Do they say? Yeah, they do.
There's demand for it.
Yeah, there's a demand. Sorry? Miriam said there's demand?
Yes.
There's a demand for products and services from such organizations. It's good for business because people are happier patronizing a business like that. We'll talk more about that in a bit. But that's their first point is it's good for business. They also believe in particular that it's good for Canada as a whole, both in terms of your internal activities and what you do overseas. If you take a look at source number 2 from Global Affairs Canada, when companies operate in an economically, socially, and environmentally responsible manner, and they do so transparently, it can create shared value. Identification and mitigation of social and environmental risks are increasingly important for business success abroad, as the costs to communities of losing company support in terms of social conflict, reputation, and the bottom line may be significant. As Canadian firms take advantage of global opportunities, there is an increasing understanding that incorporation of responsible business practices into investments and operations abroad not only benefits local economies and communities, but makes good business sense. They've expanded here what the benefits are. Right? When they talk about the way you engage abroad, what are the benefits of it?
Global benefits?
Benefit to your company.
You're global. You're talking.
Yeah. When you function internationally.
I say none.
No, but I asked what they said. I know what you're going to say. We'll come to you. Because Moshe, I've known you for enough years.
Depends on the companies. Depends on the countries.
But look at what I want to know is read the paragraph and tell me what they see as the benefit.
I read it.
Shared value for everybody. Everybody's benefiting.
The key is in the middle of the paragraph.
Community support.
Community support. And they specify right after that, what do they mean by community support? Social conflict, reputation, and the bottom line. The bottom line, we understand what they mean. That's what we already read in source number 1, that people will want to buy from a business like that. Reputation, working your way backward, is just another way of saying, again, people will like you and therefore they'll be your customers. But the one before that is I think, powerful in its own right, and that's the argument about social conflict. You come into a community where they have a particular set of values, and you run counter to it, then you raise antagonism from the community itself, who look at you as an invader and somebody who's not in line with their local values, and you can get backlash as a result of that. Okay, Moshe disagrees. Go ahead.
Why? My arguments are very simple.
Yes.
Every country is different. The social value in one country is completely the opposite of the social value in another country.
True.
You can't.
Well, not opposite, but in some ways it'll be different.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can't make a general term, this is what we're going to be, because every country is different. You have to judge the country itself and go according to just the country itself.
Right, but I think that's what they're saying. In other words, they have yet to say specifically what practices are involved. They've said, we want to help the environment, we want to help people, we want to help the community, but they have not defined how that help happens.
About this. They work by bribes.
No, that's social responsibility. Miriam.
When we look at customers who are not actually seeing the impact directly, but they're just seeing the cost being higher, because all this is going to cost more.
Yes.
Somehow that may, depending on the customer, sometimes take much of a second, buy the fridge.
Right.
Do I really want to know what's going on behind?
Right.
If I do, that's great, but is everybody that way?
Right, so we're going to talk about that. That's a very important point, which is, how much value does this really have? It's one thing to say, this has value and people will recognize it and it's going to make them want to buy your products and say, rah, rah, what a great company this is. But at the end of the day, if it costs more to them, how far are they really going to go? How much more are they willing to pay for socially responsible coffee? Or whatever else we're talking about. So that's something we do have to come back to, absolutely. From a halachic perspective, corporate social responsibility also has its role to play. And again, we're going to talk more about this, but I wanted to show you one source from the Rambam in source number 3, dealing with the laws of Gezelah. Gezelah, theft, where you take something from somebody else, generally by force. So he says, Asur liknos davar gazul min hagazlan. You're not allowed to purchase stolen goods from a thief. Shakolo said dvarim elu b'kayotze bahen mechazek yedei ovrei avera. Because if you do that, you strengthen the hands of sinners. V'over al v'lifnei iver lo sitein mechshol, and you violate the commandment not to put a stumbling block before the blind. There is a prohibition against causing people to stumble. You're causing him to stumble. So the question was asked, what do you mean? Why does Maimonides need to say here, don't buy it from a thief? Who else would you buy it from? Why did he stress you're not allowed to buy it from a thief? He's making a point.
If you know that it's from a thief, that it's stolen, then you can buy it. If you don't know, then...
Right, but then I wouldn't need the halacha altogether if I don't know.
Basically, the source of whatever goods you're buying is wrong. That has that implication. So you're even if you know, even if you don't know, if you cause something to happen, you're helping something happen that is not good.
Right. I think I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, but if it is, good point. If not, I'll ask you to clarify. It is. There you go. It's about the impact on the thief. The reason why he's presenting here, the reason why I'm not allowed to purchase these goods is not the fact that they are stolen. The fact that they're stolen is an issue between the thief and the original owner of the product. That's not my issue. The reason why I'm not supposed to do it is because when I buy it, I impact the thief because now he knows he has a market.
Yeah.
That's the issue. So that's why he emphasizes don't buy this from a thief. It's the impact on the thief that we are concerned about. So in the event that I had access to materials that were obtained illegally, but I wasn't going to do it in a way that would in fact benefit the thief. The thief was not going to see a benefit such that it would encourage further activity. This law wouldn't apply. I'm not guilty of lifnei there. I'm not guilty of putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. That would be a major distinction to be made. Yeah.
Do we also have a complementary concept how to go that work?
Yes, although it's for a separate reason, but it's a separate discussion of what exactly the rights of a thief are. Because the rule is that while you're exempt from liability, you're also not allowed to do it. The Gemara talks about the classic case of Rav Huna. Hang on. The case of Rav Huna. No, because again, what I'm following up with. The case of Rav Huna in which he has a sharecropper who works in his vineyard, and Rav Huna refuses to pay him. And he's challenged, why aren't you paying him? And the answer is because he takes vines home every day. He has already gotten his wages in what he's been stealing from me. And he's told you have to pay him anyway. You have to deal with this through the court system. You're not allowed to be a vigilante. The principle of Avedish Dina L'Nafshe is very circumscribed, where you're allowed to take justice into your own hands. Generally speaking, even if you're not liable in court, it's not considered appropriate activity. But in terms of what's being said here, we understand that there is an impact of what we do on others, and we are in fact warned not to engage in what you would call, I guess, socially irresponsible activity. However, there's a flip side to this. Howard?
Can you purchase stolen goods if it's not from it?
Right, so the question, that goes back to what I was saying. It depends on what your circumstances. You'd have to come up with a case in which your action is not in any way encouraging impropriety. Has it gone through multiple hands, for example? I don't encourage it in general. I want to make sure that's clear. But here's the flip side. Now I'm going to go further with this because we've barely seen anything, and we're 10 minutes in. There's a flip side to this. And the flip side to it is that a business has a duty not just to the community, but also to their stakeholders. They have a responsibility, if they're a publicly traded company, to the members of the public who hold their shares. They have a responsibility to their investors. And the question of how you balance that responsibility is not at all clear. Take a look at source number 4, article from the Globe and Mail. The Canadian Understanding of Director Duties. The Supreme Court of Canada's landmark decision in the BCE Incorporated case sets out a distinctively Canadian understanding of directors' fiduciary duty and has important implications for how directors make decisions. What are you talking about? Here's the case. The case concerned a challenge by a group of Bell Canada debenture holders to the proposed acquisition of BCE through a $52 billion plan of arrangement. The debenture holders objected to the arrangement on grounds that it would result in the loss of Bell's investment grade rating and reduce the value of their debentures. So these are people who have lent money to the company. The company there's going to be some kind of acquisition going on here. I'm not clear on the details of the acquisition, but it doesn't matter. Fundamentally, these people to whom the company owes money are objecting, saying it's going to damage the value of our stake in this company. The Quebec Superior Court approved the arrangement. They said the sale's fine. In a decision that rocked corporate Canada, the Quebec Court of Appeal overturned that decision and ruled that the transaction could not proceed. The Court of Appeal found that BCE's directors had a duty to consider debenture holders' non-contractual interests and were required not simply to accept the best offer for shareholders, but to consider whether the arrangement could be structured in a way that provided a satisfactory price to the shareholders while avoiding an adverse effect on the debenture holders. Everybody's got to be satisfied. Even those who are not shareholders, who don't have voting rights and so on, they have to be satisfied as well. In a unanimous decision, go back the other way, the Supreme Court overturned the Court of Appeal and reaffirmed its holding in People's Department Stores v. Wise that the director's fiduciary duty is owed at all times to the corporation and not to shareholders or any other stakeholders. You see the confusion. We're going multiple directions with this. The first decision is the sale's fine. Second decision is, no, you have to worry about these people. Third decision is, you don't have to worry about these people. You look at the corporation. If this is good for the company, everybody else has to go along for the ride. Although the Supreme Court said that in considering what is in the best interest of the corporation, directors, quote, may look to the interests of various stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, creditors, consumers, governments, and the environment, in practice, directors will need to consider the impact of their decisions on affected stakeholders. This is because the Supreme Court found that the duty of directors to act in the best interests of the corporation, quote, comprehends a duty to treat individual stakeholders affected by corporate actions fairly and equitably. So you do have to care about the stakeholders, but you get to balance all of the different sides in order to come to your conclusion. In circumstances where stakeholders' interests conflict, the court noted that, quote, there is no principle that one set of interests, for example, the interests of shareholders, should prevail over another set of interests. Everything depends on the particular situation faced by the directors and whether, having regard to that situation, they exercise business judgment in a responsible way. So what they are saying is, you have some level of duty to your stakeholders. You have to take into consideration the different interests. And then you have to make a reasonable decision. You don't have to be right, so to speak. There isn't an objective right and wrong. But you have to show that you actually took into consideration all of these different factors and tried to balance the needs that are involved. We find a similar idea in halacha, in Jewish law. If you take a look at source number 5, this is from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, regarding partnerships. Hamishtateif im chaveiro bistam. You make a partnership with somebody else. And partnerships like these, generally speaking, involve the following arrangement. Not so different from today's corporate structure, just simpler. You have an investing partner and you have a managing partner. That's what you're talking about. So here they're talking about the duties of the managing partner towards the investor. You can't you can't veer from local practice regarding for managing that kind of merchandise. Whatever the merchandise is, if there's a norm, an industry norm, that's what you follow. He's not allowed to travel elsewhere, meaning at the expense of taking care of this business he's supposed to be managing. He says, I'd like to go to Bermuda for a few months. He's not allowed to do that. He's not allowed to bring in other partners. He's not allowed to take work with other merchandise. Obviously, if you make an arrangement that allows for this, then we're fine. But otherwise, we don't want you to arbitrarily, or not even arbitrarily, but at your own initiative, make decisions that are going to affect the good of the investment. As long as you don't vary and you're not careless, you handle it the way you would handle your own property, and we're good with that. So what we're establishing in this source is simply that you have to take into consideration the good of the investors. Read shareholders, read people who have lent money, whatever it is, who are going to be affected by the decisions you make and the practices you engage in, and you're responsible to stick to certain industry norms in general. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But what we've set out, and what I wanted to articulate at the outset, is that there is a value that is recognized from a secular perspective. That social responsibility may be good for your bottom line. It may be good in terms of getting you customers. It may be good in terms of avoiding social conflict in the arenas where you do business. At the same time, you have a level of responsibility towards your stakeholders, and you can't just say, therefore, I think our aluminum recycling business is now going to donate money to scholarships for a local school. And not take into consideration whether this is really going to affect your bottom line, the question of how much is this going to raise my price and is it going to hurt me in terms of customers, and is this really what my stakeholders want? Are we clear on that basic statement of the issue? Okay. So the questions that we have to address, I've set out 4 questions, of which I expect to get to 3, but I've included the 4th just in case. I wouldn't want anyone to be bored. The first is, what kind of corporate behavior are we talking about? What is this corporate social responsibility that we're talking about? Second, what is the extent of a corporation's responsibility in the area of human rights? That's also in the title of this session. What is the extent of a corporation's responsibility? And what I mean by that is corporation versus individual. It's one thing to talk about what I personally have to do. But what about when you're dealing with a business? It's not an individual. Or is it? That's what we have to talk about. And then the third point is, how do you balance the duty to stakeholders with the duty to society as a whole? And then finally, the part that I don't think we're going to get to, but maybe, is legislation for socially responsible conduct. Let's say the government says, we are actually going to create rules that are going to govern what you do. So for example, there's a company, there's a country, I think Sri Lanka is like this, where there is no child labor protection. Meaning that children can work from any age. It was true of them as of 10 years ago. I just haven't looked it up to see whether it's still true. There are no child labor laws. So the company says, I'm operating here in Ontario. It'd be a lot cheaper if I can employ the children over there. Why don't they have child labor protections over there? Why not? Sorry? They bring in money because they'll be broke. If you don't let the kids work, the families will not eat. So therefore, I'm actually not being a bad guy. I'm being a good guy. I'm providing food to families that need it. This way they're able to put bread on the table. So that's the way I look at it. Not me personally, me in this scenario, okay? So the question now is, though, what if the government of Canada says, we are now making a law? Companies that do business based in Canada are not allowed to partner with those who, or get products from those who employ children. From a Jewish law standpoint, would that have the status of Dina de Malchusa, the law of the land? Or is that beyond the government's ability to legislate and be binding? So we may get to that, we may not get to it, but it's an interesting question to think about.
I have actually an interesting point regarding that. Mm-hmm. Let's say which happens every day, there's a country that decides they're not going to do any business with Israel or whatever the problems are there. They say if you do business with them, it's because of whatever they say, plane, company, apartheid, and all this stuff. Then, are you, like as a Jew, should you actually do business with companies or countries that do stuff like this?
That's a really good question. So that we can actually touch on that as part of what we're going to talk about. So I expect it. I didn't intend that, but it actually does fit in with part of what we're going to talk about.
Also known as Airbnb.
Yeah. In case that wasn't clear. Okay, but I believe we're going to get to that as part of answering the second question. All right, so the first question, what kind of corporate behavior are we talking about, and why would we expect a corporation to care about CSR if it's not required by law? So, generally speaking, and we've already seen this a little bit, there are three different directions in which Jewish law expects individuals, forget companies for the moment, but individuals to act responsibly. One, towards one's employees. We talked about that. We had a session here a while back, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where we talked about employee injury and the relationship between employer and employee. And we said that there is a responsibility of employer towards employee. That doesn't mean you have to go bankrupt trying to take care of the employee. That doesn't mean that you harm society by creating an astronomical minimum wage and therefore you end up killing jobs. That's not what we're talking about. But there is a sense of responsibility towards one's employee. That's number one. Number two, there's an issue with your partners. Meaning making sure that you are not partnering with people who are engaged in inappropriate behavior such that you profit from it or encourage it. And we're going to talk more about that, but I'm just outlining the directions in which the relationships go. The third is responsibility toward one's community. And things like investing in local vocational programs, mentorship programs, that kind of thing. Three different dimensions. Your employees within the company, the way you do business with your partners, and responsibility towards the outward community.
Is that just DACA? Are we talking in the last?
The last one? More or less, yes. I think so. So, what motivates these sorts of activities? So one approach is the altruism approach, and I articulated it here in terms of both negatives and positives as presented by Ramban, Rabbi Moses Nachmanides. Take a look at source number 7. This is in terms of the negative. The Torah commands, Kedoshim Tihyu, you shall be holy. Ramban explains what that means. He says, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to read out the English, The Torah warned us regarding relations, forbidden foods, permitted warned us meaning it prohibited. I really should have translated that better. Prohibited certain sexual relations and forbidden foods, and permitted marital relations and eating meat and wine, such that a hedonist could find a way to be immersed in impropriety, drinking wine, eating meat gluttonously, speaking as he wishes of all depravity. For no prohibition in this regard is mentioned in the Torah. He will be depraved within the bounds of the Torah, right? As the Hebrew classically goes, Naval Birshut HaTorah. Therefore, the text followed its list of explicit prohibitions by instructing as a general rule that we should be separated from permitted practices. Meaning, what the Torah is saying is, there are certain things that legally you could get away with. In terms of the Torah's specific prohibitions, they are not banned. However, they are violations of holiness, and therefore they're prohibited. Kedoshim to you, you shall be holy. That's one. That's the negative. And then there's also a flip side, positive. The Torah says, "Ve'asita hayashar ve'atov." You shall do that which is righteous and good, that which is straight and good. And Nachmanides comments on that in source number 8. The Torah could not state all human conduct with neighbors and friends, and all interactions and the needs of civilization in all nations. The Torah can't list for you all the different positive types of behaviors people are going to need to engage in. So what did it do? After it mentioned many of them, it specified certain behaviors, it returned to state a general rule: act in the way that is good and straight in all matters. Ve'asita hayashar v'hatov. Be just. That's the overarching. So we have commands which are altruistic. This is not about the effect on your bottom line. This is not about the reputation of your business. This is about being a good person. And the Torah says, don't engage in wrongdoing, and do engage in positive activity. And even if the Torah does not explicitly state the rule, you are meant to employ your conscience. Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein was famous for writing on this issue. Source number 9, little quote from him. He says, surely in relating to halakha, including those areas which one may find morally difficult, there is some role for conscience, some role for the goodness in us, particularly in an interpretive capacity. When it comes to interpreting law, to asking, what does God want of me? That's where your conscience belongs. Conscience does and legitimately can have a role in helping us to understand the content and the substance of the tzav, of the divine command. So number 1 is altruism. Be a good person. That's what was the Google line, whether they do it or not? Was it Google or Facebook? Which one? Do no evil? You know what I'm talking about? Don't be evil or something like that? Was it Apple? Okay, one of those companies that may sometimes follow it. But that's basically what you're hearing here, is just from a purely altruistic perspective.
Why not? Why is it altruistic? I mean, you do good not for others. You do good because you're...
That's what altruism is. That's what, no, by definition of the word altruism. That's what the word means.
I see altruism as opposed to egotism or selfishness.
Altruism as a basic concept means that which you do not because you expect to get anything, but simply because this is the right thing to do. That's what it means. The second dimension to it is what we may call enlightened self-interest. And this goes back to what the government of Canada was arguing in our opening sources, that it's good for you. In what way? So source number 10 makes an argument that we didn't see in the introductory sources. Being a socially responsible business often involves higher material and labor costs, but there is a business case to be made for being a good corporate citizen. In a competitive labor market, employees are drawn to companies that have a good track record for responsible behavior, such as environmental protection. By being a good role model, a company will attract people who have skills such as innovativeness, leadership, and the ability to work in teams. And by treating employees responsibly, costly employee turnover is minimized. It is also good for a business to stand out from the crowd, for the right reasons, of course. Being a good corporate citizen can help a company differentiate itself. So the idea is that you will get, aside from what we said before, which is you may get customers and avoid social conflict, there's an added dimension here, in that you get a better class of employee. And all sorts of studies have been done, although anecdotally you can probably refer to this from your own experience, to show that people will engage, believe it or not. It sounds funny to say it, but it's true. People will engage in conduct based on whether it's appropriate and not necessarily based on their own self-interest, even their financial self-interest. There's a classic experiment that's been done over and over and over again regarding the $20 split. You know what I'm talking about? The $20 split? The $20 split goes like this. They give two people $20, and they say, you're going to split it with each other. That's the idea. The first one is going to decide how much of the 20 he's going to take for himself, and then the second one will decide whether to accept the terms. If he doesn't accept the terms, he gets nothing. If he accepts the terms, then he gets whatever the first one wanted to give him. And what the studies show, and I'm quoting one particular one, but this has been done over and over again, is that in 45 out of 51 trials, the person who initiated the split offered a 50-50 split. He did not say, I'm going to take 13 and you take 7, and bank on the fact that the other guy wants to have the $7. In 5 out of the other 6, the proposal that was made was lopsided, and the other person refused the lopsided proposal. So in other words, he did this 51 times. 45 times, the guy said, I'll take 10, you take 10, we're done. 6 times, he offered a lopsided proposal. And of those 6 times, the recipient said no, even though he's losing for himself. Because people have a sense of appropriate behavior, and they act on that basis, even to their own detriment. People return lost wallets to strangers. People will pay money to be able to return a lost wallet to a stranger. People help strangers in distress. This is what we do. So from that perspective, you know that if you engage in responsible conduct, other people will recognize it and within limits will reward it. This is a self-interest. This is not altruistic. They will reward those who they see as engaging in appropriate behavior. If you take a look at source number 11, Professor Moses Pava, in his book, Business Ethics, A Jewish Perspective, talks about the work of a fellow named Robert Frank. He says, to summarize, in Frank's view, the key to understanding how altruism can be sustained is the idea that reputation matters. In a world where reputations are meaningless, where nobody knows what anybody else is doing, you just go to the shelf and you pick the product off the shelf, the self-interested come to dominate. But in a world where reputations are completely accurate and freely available, altruists come to dominate. Right? It assumes that the reputation is accurate. It actually reflects what they're doing, not a company that gives itself a good name but is paying slave labor or whatever it is, on the side. But where they're actually, where the reputation is accurate and anybody has access to the information, altruists come to dominate. Yeah.
So in our world, with all this dissemination of information and the internet and shaming on the internet, it sounds like that would be a force to contribute to better behavior all around because everybody knows everything,
right.
Which is counter.
And the answer is maybe. And the reason the answer is maybe is the session that I gave 2 weeks ago on anonymous whistleblowing. One of the problems is that you can't necessarily trust your whistleblowers if they're not accountable. So when they are anonymous, and the social media forum, it certainly is anonymous, then they can say whatever they like. They can start rumors that your company is doing something great or something terrible, which has no reflection at all of reality. So that's the danger. I also brought you an interview with Jeff Furman. Jeff Furman is a trustee of the Ben & Jerry's Foundation, board member emeritus. So he says, there's no doubt that the social mission is the key to how we differentiate our company. I've been quoted saying that Ben & Jerry's would be irrelevant if we didn't have a social mission. There's a lot of good local brands that make great quality ice creams. If we didn't exist and you walked into your supermarket, it would be just as full of ice cream. It's not as though there's going to be a shortage because Ben & Jerry's disappears. How we stand out is the fact that we push back on all those injustices. We have some shelf space and we try to make a difference. So his argument is it's good for their business. The person who goes to the shelf and wants to buy something he feels good about is going to pick them. Otherwise, same odds as anybody else. You still have to make good ice cream, because as he also points out in the same interview, it's not good enough to just say, this is our social mission. If your ice cream isn't good, they'll buy it the first time because of your mission, and they won't buy it a second time. That's still, that's still important. So what we have is, number one, the idea of altruism. Number two, in addition to altruism, you have the enlightened self-interest, which you find in the Torah as well. Take a look at source number 13. This is a classic line in the Talmud, which I believe could be read in two ways. You've heard this before. The Talmud asks, what is the merit of wealthy Israelis? Why is it that they get money? It's part of a discussion also of wealthy Babylonians and so on. What's their merit? So the response in the Gemara is, because they tithe. Right? There are tithes that apply to Israeli produce. Because the Torah introduces one of the laws of the tithe is by saying aser te'aser. Now, aser te'aser on a literal level is you shall surely tithe, or you shall tithe repeatedly. But the way that the Talmud comments on it is reading this double language aser te'aser, either as aser bishvil shetit aser, tithe, so that you will be tithed again. Meaning, if you tithe, you will earn more, and therefore you will merit to be able to do it again. Or the alternate read, aser b'shvil shetit asher, tithe so that you will become wealthy. But either way, there's a sense of, this will be good for you in the end. If you separate what you're supposed to separate and give it where it's supposed to be given, you will get something back in the end. That motivation, the question of, is your motivation altruistic? Or is it enlightened self-interest is going to matter as we answer the other questions. Because now we move into the second of the questions, which is this really for a corporation? Right? You say that this is for individuals. What about a corporation? So it depends how you look at corporations. If you say a corporation is just a set of individuals, then it's very clear. Meaning, does everyone understand the question? Because we've talked about it in another context. Let me make sure that it's 100% clear. Before Pesach, I have a mitzvah. I have to get rid of my chametz. Right? No leaven, I'm not allowed to own leaven, and so on. If I own shares in a company, and the company has chametz holdings, is that an issue? We've got a yes here, we've got a no there.
No, I discussed it, and there was no...
The answer is it's a machlokas. This is a debate. The question is, what is the relationship between the individual stakeholders and the company? One way to look at it is that you, as a stakeholder, are considered an owner of what the company has, even though you could not walk into the warehouse and take something and say, this is what I'm taking for my share. Nonetheless, you are considered to be an owner of whatever the company owns. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, no. There's a separate legal entity. It's called a corporation. And whatever ownership you have is an investment in the corporation, but you are not the owner. And this is a standard debate. This is not like an easy here's the answer type of a thing. That's what I'm asking here. Even if I have a personal responsibility, maybe that has nothing to do with the corporation in which I'm investing.
Why should I care? The owners are getting perks, airplane trips, golf trips, all kinds of shtuot that I never get. Big deal, I take a little something.
That's not a good idea. That's really not a good idea.
Well, they're taking what...
So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that for a separate discussion, not because it's uninteresting, but because it's not directly about this. If a corporation is just a set of individuals, then the individual has a clear set of responsibilities that go back to the three we articulated in the beginning. Number one, I have responsibility towards employees, and I mentioned this briefly before when I referred to the session we had a couple of years ago on this point. Source number 14. I see that it's getting late, and I don't want to keep people late. So we're going to sum up what you see here. Source number 14 discusses the responsibility that a boss has if he hires a porter. I hire someone to carry goods, and he puts too much on his shoulders, and he gets hurt. Says the Talmud, I am responsible. Now, it depends. How much did I overload him? Was it normal or not? There's a debate as to when I am responsible, but without a doubt, I am responsible. Take a look at source number 15. Maimonides codifies it. If one added a kav is a volume measure. If one added a kav to a porter's burden, and he was hurt by the burden, one must pay for his damage. although he is intelligent and he senses the weight of the burden, and therefore you say, well, it was his problem, he thinks the weight may be due to his illness. He thinks that maybe I'm not feeling well today, this is probably safe because they put it on my shoulders, and therefore he proceeds and he gets hurt. I, as the employer, am responsible. The Sma, the Sefer Mirat Einayim, Rav Yeshua Falk, in source number 16, says that with each industry, it has to be based on whatever the industry norm is, how far you veered from the local norm. So there is a duty towards one's employees. That class I referred you to from a few years ago is found in number 17 at the link there if you want to hear that, more about employer to employee. But fundamentally what we articulated there is that there are two levels at least of responsibility here. Number one, there's the trust element. Your employee expects you not to do things that will cause harm, and you're a vandal if you cause harm. And stronger, there's a duty of care. You accept responsibility for this person's well-being. So there is a duty towards employees. That's part of the responsibility. Miriam?
Is it key that it's an employee, not a contractor?
Yes. There is a little bit of a distinction potentially to be made where it's a contractor. Number two, responsibility in your relationship with your partners, and this goes back to the BDS question and the Airbnb discussion. Because, indeed, we are not allowed to partner with those who engage in unethical behavior. And unethical here is as defined by the Torah, as opposed to the laws in Japan or Australia or Canada or anywhere else. Source number 18 is one example of this from Tanakh. There are a couple of examples that are usually brought from Tanakh. In this case, it's a partnership made between the two Jewish kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judea. And the key part is there towards the end of source number 18, when the prophecy is brought to King Yehoshaphat. When you joined with Ahaziah, the king of Israel, God destroyed your deeds. Meaning you should never have joined in a partnership with somebody who is committing wickedness. And that's brought in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in source number 19, which says, distance yourself from a bad neighbor, do not join with a wicked person. Al titchaber la rasha. I am not allowed to join with people who engage in impropriety. This is something that's not only a Jewish law, this is found in secular systems as well. Take a look, jump to number 21, please. The CPA Code of Professional Conduct, responsibility for a non-member. A member or firm engaged in a practice of public accounting to which another business or practice is related, or engaged in such related business or practice, shall be responsible to CPA Ontario for any failure of a non-member who is associated with such related business or practice and is under the member's or firm's management or supervision. You're an accountant, you're working with someone who's not an accountant in some kind of a partnership, they do something that violates the rules of CPA Ontario, you're on the hook. There's a responsibility for the conduct of your partners. Why? Why are you responsible for your partners? Why am I responsible not to partner with other people who do bad things? Sorry? So one issue is what we said before, which is that you encourage them. Right? You're encouraging them in their conduct. But another point is you become like them.
You're profiting from
You're profiting from it, and it rubs off. This becomes your identity as well, writes Maimonides. I didn't bring it on the sheet. So this comes up in terms of partnering with those who engage in unethical behavior, and it comes up in terms of where you get your materials. If you get materials that were produced in a way that is unethical, if you take a look at source number 22, this is Canada's Federal Criminal Code. Everyone commits an offense who has in his possession any property or thing or any proceeds of any property or thing, knowing that all or part of the property or thing or of the proceeds was obtained by or derived directly or indirectly from the commission in Canada of an offense punishable by indictment or an act of omission anywhere that, if it had occurred in Canada, would have constituted an offense punishable by indictment. How do you like that for your stolen goods? You're not allowed to have goods that you know are stolen according to Canada's criminal code. So even if, we said before, the only problem is that you're encouraging the thief, the law of the land says no. Law of the land says you're not allowed to have stolen goods. There was a hand back there before? No? Here.
So you're not allowed to join someone who is bad, but let's say you were in a theoretical situation of 10 partners in a firm. Some of the partners are more senior,
right.
Some are more junior, and they bring in someone else who you, as a junior person, thinks, I don't feel so good about them.
So
You're not joining, but you're sort of being commandeered.
Right. So it's a good question, but I'm gonna hold off on this. Maybe I'll include something about it because it's an important question, and there is literature on it. Maybe when I send out the follow-up email from the session, maybe I'll include something about that, the limits of this prohibition. Maybe in the follow-up, we'll see. Okay. So what we see here is, again, assuming that you are viewed as an individual, not as some corporation. You have responsibility towards your employees. You have responsibility in terms of partnering with people who are engaged in wrongdoing. And then you have the responsibility towards community, which, as was noted before, come down to tzedakah. I brought you Maimonides, source number 23, just have some source there, but you know there are many on this. I'm not dwelling on that point. But what if a corporation is a separate entity? What if we don't view the corporation, we don't view you as the stakeholder as directly involved? In that case, the board does not necessarily bear any of these duties. The board of the corporation can say, that's not really for us. However, the beneficiary does, meaning the individual shareholder is still a beneficiary of whatever wrongdoing is going on. And therefore the argument can be made that even if we view the corporation as a separate legal entity, you as an investor, because you reap the benefits of the wrongdoing, do end up with a level of responsibility. So in terms of question number 2, the question of does a corporation have responsibility, the answer is definitely if they're viewed as individuals, and even possibly even if it's viewed as a separate legal entity. But I want to hit the third question. We're not going to hit the last one about the legislation. I expected it would be beyond the scope of what we would get to. But I do want to hit the third question, which is, how does a corporation balance civic duty and duty to stakeholders? Because as was noted, doing all these CSR things comes with a price. Right? There's going to be an impact on your bottom line. Even if it helps your bottom line, it can also hurt it. Price of your product goes up. This is also a good time for me to ask, where are the sign-in sheets? There were 3 of them. There's over there's one, over there's one, over there's one. Okay, just if anyone didn't sign in particular, if you want a letter saying you were here, I need you to have signed in. I can't have you email me afterwards and say, I'm sorry, I forgot to sign in. Also, if you want the follow-up email and notices about the future lunches. Okay. How does a corporation balance civic duty and duty to stakeholders? So, the duty to stakeholders is very clear. We already gave one reference to it from the Code of Jewish Law about the managing partner and the investing partner. If you take a look at source number 24, this is an illustration of the duty that one has to an employer. From the Pischei Choshen, which is a landmark work on business law and business ethics. An employee is required not to cease working a little here and a little there. He must take care to be precise regarding times. He is obligated to work with all of his powers. An employee may not perform his own work at night and hire himself out by day such that he doesn't rest, and therefore his work is of a diminished quality. He may not starve himself and cause himself suffering. This will diminish his work for the employer. You have a duty to the people you work for. And you have a duty to the people whose assets you are controlling. Sources 25 and 26 come from the laws of legal guardians. What does a court look for when it appoints a legal guardian? Even though legal guardians are not the same as business partners, but I want to show you what the court looks for in a guardian. Number 25, a trustworthy person of substance who knows how to lobby for the benefit of the orphans, makes their claims, has a strong business position, and he's responsible not to be careless, as seen in source number 26. So, now, how do we deal with that in this context? So good, you have a duty to the shareholders, you have to work hard, you have to not be careless, that's fine. On the other hand, we've said that you have a duty to the community. So how do you deal with this? This goes back to the question of motivation. Now we'll understand why we spend time talking about motivation. If the motivation is to benefit the business, enlighten self-interest, then the company is licensed to do what it feels is necessary to benefit the business. Even if it means it's going to drive up the cost of the product. Fundamentally, you do not have a responsibility to run every decision past the shareholders. If you take a look at source 27, which also is a legal guardian situation, The guardian spends, collects, builds, demolishes, does everything as he sees fit for the orphans and takes care of their needs. But he doesn't get their approval. He doesn't get the court's approval for every decision. And even if the benefit is indirect, that's still true. Number 28 talks about a case in which you are guarding the property of orphans. The court has appointed you to take care of their property, and you decide it would be good for them if you made a donation to a charity, to give tzedakah in their name. Because then the community will take them more seriously. They'll be seen as a productive part of the community. If he assesses them for tzedakah, to give them status, in number 28, so that they'll develop a good reputation and they can afford it, this is fine. So what that shows is that if you believe it's good for their reputation, if you believe it's good for the business, you're licensed to take that step. And if a legal guardian for orphans' property can do it, then certainly an investor, a managing partner is going to be able to do it for a business. He has to make the decisions carefully. But that's number one. What if your motive is altruistic? In that case, the managing partner may only act as instructed, or what he can reasonably assume that the investors would want. He has much less leeway. If he's doing it because this is the right thing to do, then he has to be much more narrow. And my evidence for this is source number 29. The Hebrew is on one side, the English is the top, and the next side is talking about tithing. And the rule is this. I have a farmer. I have produce. I tell my agent, go separate the truma tithe. What percentage of the produce is truma? What is he supposed to separate? What's the percentage? No, truma. No. Truma, the rule is there's a range between 1/40th and 1/60th. The middle is 2%, 1/50th. But it's really a range. You can legitimately tithe 1/40th, and that's great. You can legitimately tithe 1/60th. You fulfill your obligation either way. You told your agent, separate the truma tithe. What percentage does he give to the Kohen? What percentage does he separate as truma? So look at what it says. Source 29. If one tells his agent, go tithe, he tithes according to the owner's personality. He has to know what the owner would want. If he doesn't know the owner's personality, he should tithe at the intermediate level. Assume 1/50th. Hit the middle of the range. But the point is that it is directed based on what he wants. Even though we have a principle in Jewish law which says that people want their property to be used for mitzvot, and I might take that as generosity. As I show in source number 30, that's only where you're getting your object back. It's talking about mitzvah objects, not a donation. I can lend somebody my talis. Somebody walks into shul and sees my sitter there, davens with it and puts it down in the same condition it was in. And that's fine. He's allowed to do that. But if I'm not going to get it back, he's not allowed to do that. And in this case, it's a donation. It's not, you're not seeing back. And therefore, my view would be that if the motive of CSR is altruistic, not it's going to improve our bottom line, but just this is a good thing to do, then the managing partner is only allowed to act as instructed or what he can reasonably assume the shareholders would want. So to sum up everything we've said in about 30 seconds, we've said that there's an issue of corporate social responsibility, which Canada is very much encouraging. The motivation could be altruistic. The motivation could also be enlightened self-interest. We saw that from a secular perspective as well as from a Jewish perspective. And we said that the corporation, if the corporation is really just a set of individuals, then all the obligations individuals have, the company has also. If it's a corporation and not a set of individuals, then whoever benefits from the company has to ask, is it appropriate for me to benefit from this or not? But that's the limit of their responsibility. And we said that the corporation, if it's acting to benefit the business, then the managing partners have a lot of leeway to decide what will benefit the business, as long as they're not careless. But in the event that they're doing it altruistically, they can really only do that which the stakeholders have instructed them to do, or logically they can mind read that the investors would want. There's much more to say, as always. We continue next week with the last week in this series. Rabbi Elihu Abbey is going to be speaking about ethical accounting for shareholders. 12:30, God willing, next Wednesday. Thank you very much.